Okay, so before we continue talking about factoring trinomials, let's kind of review something. Suppose you want to multiply, and let's say we want to multiply 3x minus 5 times 2x minus 3, let's say. What would you do? Okay, you're multiplying two binomials, so you definitely could use the FOIL method, which is a form of the distributive property. So yes, you could use a FOIL method. And so when I use a FOIL method, remember the F of FOIL means you're going to take the first term of each binomial. So what's the first term of the first binomial? And you're going to multiply by the first term of the second binomial, which is 2x. So you got to remember that 3x times 2x is 6x squared. Okay, not 6x, 6x squared. All right, so I'm going to write 6x squared. So that's my first. So I'm going to end up with 4 terms. Okay, so that's my first term. Let's come out, get the outer term. Now the outer term, remember this is multiplication. 3x minus 5 times 2x minus 3. So you're multiplying two binomials. The outer term means this. You're going to take the terms that are on the outside of this expression that you see, these factors. So 3x times a negative 3 is a negative 9x. So that's your outer. So this is your first, this is your outer. Then the inner term, to get the inner term, you're going to look at the terms that are inside here. So that's a negative 5 times a
times 2x.
positive 2x, which is a negative 10x. So that's your inner term. And then your last term is the same idea as your first. So you take the first term of each binomial, you multiply them. This says you take the last term of each binomial and you multiply them. So negative 5 times a negative 3 is a positive 15. All right. Now, that's not your final answer because you got to remember I have 4 terms here, but what can I do with 2 of those terms? I can combine them. And normally for us, not always true, but normally for us, it's going to turn out that the outer and the inner is going to be what you're going to combine, and it is in this case. A negative 9x and a negative 10x is a negative 19x. So that's what you would write as your answer if that were the directions. And number 2, sometimes what gets students is this. So let's say you had 3x minus 7 squared. So what some students want to do is when they see this, they want to square the 3x and they want to square the negative 7, and that's it. That's not true. That's not what that indicates. So you got to remember what something like this means. What does x squared mean? Don't say 64. Just tell me what it means. 8 times 8. That's what it means. 8 times 8, which is 64. So this right here, what's being squared? 3x minus 7, the binomial. So that means 3x minus 7 times itself. All right, and then you FOIL it out, just like you did number 1. So 3x times 3x? 9x is a second. Okay? All right, 9x squared. What's the outer? Negative 21x. What's the inner? Negative 21x. All right, so whenever you square a binomial, the outer and the inner are the same thing. You'll notice that. The outer is negative 21x, the inner is negative 21x. That's because you're squaring a binomial. The last, what's a negative 7 times a negative 7? What is it? Positive 49. So what's the answer? 9x squared minus 42x. A negative 21x and a negative 21x is a negative 42x plus 49. And then number 3, let's suppose you had let's say you had 7 x squared y times 3x squared minus 7x plus y. So 7x squared y times 3x squared minus 7x plus y. So you can use the FOIL method here? No, because you're not multiplying two binomials. You're actually multiplying a monomial by a trinomial. So in 1 and 2, you use the FOIL method because you were multiplying two binomials. But in number 3, if you want to multiply this, what idea are you going to use? Distributive property. Okay. So you're going to multiply every term that's inside the parentheses. And how many terms are inside the parentheses? 3 by the 7x squared y. So 7x squared y, if you have to, write it out. You're saying 7x squared y times 3x squared. What's that? 21. X to the 4th. Good, because x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. And then what? Y. So that goes here. So 21 x to the 4th y. All right, let's do the other one. So this is going to be a 7x squared y times a negative 7x times a negative 7x. So a positive times a negative is going to be a negative. So there's going to be a subtraction symbol. 7 times 7 is? Okay. X squared times x is? X cubed, and then y. So minus 49 x cubed y. And then 7x squared y times a positive y. This times this now. What does that give you? 7x squared y squared, because y times y is y squared. Okay? And there are no terms you can combine. You cannot combine anything because if you look at the first term, remember, like terms are terms that have the same variables raised to the same power. So this term, it has nothing to do with the coefficients. This term is x to the 4th y. Do you see another x to the 4th y anywhere? No. The next term is x cubed y. Do you see another x cubed y term anywhere? No. And then the third one is x squared y squared. Is there another x squared y squared anywhere? No. All right. Number 4, suppose you had 7x minus 2 times 7x plus 2. 7x minus 2 times 7x plus 2. How are you going to multiply that? Okay, you can FOIL because you're multiplying two binomials. So the first times first is 49x squared. The outer is 14x. The inner is negative 14x. And the last is negative 4. When I combine my like terms, what do I get? Yeah, because the out and the inner, that's 0. A positive 14x and a negative 14x is 0. So you just have two terms in your answer. 49x squared minus 4. All right, so that is going to be important in a few sections from now, because we're going to talk about the difference of two squares, which is what this is. Factoring the difference of two squares. All right, and then finally, number 5, suppose you had a negative 2m cubed n squared times, and let's say this was 5m minus 7n plus 2mn minus 3. So how are you going to multiply this out? Distributive property. So how many terms are inside this parentheses? 4. You're going to multiply each of those terms by what monomial? Negative 2m cubed n squared. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. What's a negative 2m cubed n squared times 5m? Negative 10 m to the 4th n what? Squared. Good. All right, now the next one. What's a negative 2m cubed n squared times a negative 7n? Positive 14, because the negative times the negative is a positive. 2 times 7 is 14. M cubed. All right, now have an n squared times n.
N cubed.
N cubed. Okay. What's a negative 2m cubed n squared times a positive 2mn?
Negative 4.
M to the
Third.
m cubed times
fourth.
m. Yeah, m to the fourth. N to the third, because n squared times n. Remember, you multiply like bases. You do what to those exponents. You add them, so n cubed. And then finally, what's a negative 2m cubed n squared times a negative 3? Positive 6m cubed n squared. Okay, so that's that. Okay, now so this was kind of a review of something we need for factoring. So the first type of factor we're going to look at will be the easy kind. So we're going to factor in the next 2 or 3 sections. We're going to factor trinomials that have this form, ax squared plus bx plus c. It has that form. And the easy kind of factoring when you have a trinomial is where the coefficient of x squared is 1. So where a is 1 in this case. So you can see what this is going to look like. So the idea with factoring, and remember we talked about factoring before. So if I ask you to factor 3x minus 9, so if you ask to do that, what's the answer? You have that in your test.
3 minus 9 is -6.
Huh?
It's 3. It's 3. You take out a 3.
Okay, so the GCF is 3. But what's the answer?
It's 3 parentheses x.
Okay, so 3 times x minus 3, right?
Yes.
So the GCF is 3, so you say 3, you factor out the 3, so it's 3 times x minus 3. That's what you did on your test. And so you can always check by doing what with your answer? Distributing, multiplying. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times a negative 3 is a negative 9. All right, now what I did was I factored, because remember, factoring means to write your in this case, polynomial as a product of factors. How many factors do you see here? 2. It's important to know what your factors are. Factors are like when we talked about 8 before, we have 4 times 2. What are the factors of 8 that you're seeing here? 4 and 2, because 4 times 2 is 8. What are the factors of 3x minus 9? What's the first one? 3. What's the second one? X minus 3. X minus 3. So those are your 2 factors. Okay? Now, this was not a trinomial, though. What was this polynomial right here? What was this polynomial? It's not a trinomial. A trinomial has how many terms? 3. This is a binomial. Binomial has how many terms? 2. What we want to do now is something like this. Given 6x squared minus 19x plus 15, this trinomial, we want to factor this, which means you want your answer to be a product of factors. So at some point, and you're going to see how to do this at some point, but at some point, you're going to give me this answer. 3x minus 5 times 2x minus 3. That's going to be your answer. So for this chapter, you're going to be asked to factor. So factoring means to take your polynomial and to write it as a product of, what's the word? Factors. So you're going to learn how to go from here to here. Now, notice what I just wrote. Number one, you were given the two factors and you had to multiply them out to come up with the polynomial, the trinomial. Now you're going backwards. You're given the trinomial and you're asked to do what? Factor. Write it as a product of two binomials in this case. So it's obviously easier to go from two binomials to the trinomial because you're just using the FOIL method, you're multiplying out. It's a little bit more challenging to go from the trinomial to what these were, or these should be. All right. So with practice, though, and if you don't practice enough, you're going to struggle with some of these. With practice, though, you tend to get a little bit better. So we're going to start out, though, with the easy kind. So the easy kind is where you have a trinomial where a is what number? 1. I'm going to ask you this. Would this be the easy kind? No, because the coefficient of x squared is not 1. What's the coefficient of x squared? 6. So that would be the more challenging kind. All right, so let's talk about the easy kind, though. All right, so write this one down. So let's go ahead and factor. Number 1. Let's say we had this, number 1. We had x squared plus 9x plus 8. So x squared plus 9x plus 8. All right, I have a trinomial. Because a trinomial has how many terms? 3. Based on test number 1, what should you always look for? GCF. What is the GCF of those 3 terms? It's 1. All right, so since GCF is 1, I'm not going to factor out the GCF because it's just 1. Now, what I want to do next, though, and for us, it's going to work out for the next few examples to do, it's going to work out this way. I want to factor this. Well, factoring, if you look at this, factoring means to take this trinomial and write it as a product of 2 factors. And it turns out that these 2 factors are, what are these factors right here? How many terms do you see? 2. Okay, binomial. All right, so a polynomial with 2 terms is called a binomial. So you want to factor this as 2 binomials. So what most students do when you're asked to factor a trinomial is go directly to 2 binomials. So you do the 2 parentheses, okay? 2 parentheses. Now this is the easy kind because a is what number? 1. A is 1. The coefficient of x squared is 1. That's 1. So that's easy kind, and here's the way to do this. So when we did this one right here, when you looked at FOIL, always use the idea of FOIL to help you. When I did FOIL here, I said first times first, right?
Yeah.
3x times 2x gave me what? Which was my first term. What's my first term here? So what should be here that I'm pointing to? X times x, because x times x is x squared. Okay? So that's always the easy one. You already know what the first term of each binomial needs to be. If that's an x squared, they need to be both x's. Now here's the other part, though. When I did this, when I did the last, so remember you're using the idea of FOIL. So I did f first. X times x is x squared. Now let's go to the last. Go to the last next. All right. I need, look at this one. I need 2 numbers whose product is a positive 15. So notice you have a negative 15 and a what? Negative 3, because the negative 5 times a negative 3 is a positive 15. Okay. Now, same idea. I want to find 2 numbers whose product is a positive 8.
1 and 8. Because
1 and 8. 4 and 2. Y'all agree? All right, so I'm looking for product, and if you need to, write it down. Products of 8. I'm looking for factors. 8 times 1, 4 times 2. Those are the only whole numbers whose product is 8. Now, this is the easy kind. You want the sum. Remember the out and the inner? The outer and the inner gives us the middle term. And what did I do with those out and the inner when I did all those problems a while ago? I added them up. I combined them. So I want to find two numbers whose product is 8, and when I do the out and the inner, their sum is 9x, or 9. Let's just do the coefficient for right now. Which of those do you think is going to work? 8 and 1. If I put the 8 here, the 1 here, and it doesn't matter where you put it for right now. If I put the 8 here, the 1 there, and knows the last sign's positive, right? Okay, think of this idea. The last sign's positive. So that means that these signs here have to be the same. They have to be the same. Because a positive times a positive is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. It helps to know these ideas when you factor. It does help. It makes you become more efficient. But notice the middle sign. What's the middle sign? Positive. So listen carefully. Suppose you made the mistake and you said x minus 8, x minus 1. Okay. It happened. You're not always going to get it right the first time, but you better check yourself. What some students do is they put something down and they think, okay, I'm fine with that. Oh, that's not true. That's not correct. So if you had taken the time and you had foiled it out, you would have seen that something is wrong here. What's x times x? X squared. So my f is okay. Let's look at the last. What's the negative 8 times the negative 1? My last is okay. The outer and the inner combined gives you which part of this trinomial? The middle. All right, let's check it. What's the outer? It's not x. What's the outer? Negative x. What's the inner? Negative 8x. When I add these up right here, what do I get? Negative 9x, which is not what I wanted. What did I want? Positive.
9x.
So they're almost identical, except they're opposite. So what should I do to these signs? Change them. So my answer then should be x minus 8. I'm sorry, x plus 8 times x plus 1. That's going to be your answer. Now, it did not matter for our purposes here. It did not matter whether you put the 1 here or the 8 here. You'll get the same answer. So notice, x plus 1 times x plus 8 is still a correct factorization. Because the order in which you multiply does not matter. Is 2 times 7 the same as 7 times 2? Yes. Is x plus 1 times x plus 8 the same as x plus 8 times x plus 1? Yeah. All right. Let's look at number 2. Okay, number 2, n squared plus 3n minus 28. N squared plus 3n minus 28. All right, now when factoring, first thing you should always look for is the GCF. What is the GCF of this polynomial? 1. Okay. If it was something other than 1, you'd factor it out, just like you did on your test. Now, since the GCF is 1 and I have a trinomial and I want to factor it, I'm going to go directly and try factoring this as a product of 2 binomials. Good. Okay. FOIL. You're using reverse FOIL. Some people call this reverse flow. Some people call this trial and error. Whatever it is. All right. Let's do the F first. Notice the routine. I do the F first. Then I do what part next? The last. The F, I need to get n squared. Okay? The F, I need to get n squared. So what times what is n squared? N. So n times n. Okay? So my F is okay. Now let's look at the last. Now what is the last term here? It's a negative 28. Not 28, a negative 28. Okay? But for right now, this is the way I would do this. For right now, let's just look at the absolute value of that. So let's look at 28 for a moment. Look at 28. So I'm going to try and find the factors of 28. So because that's what you're trying to put here, right? Two numbers whose product is negative 28, but we're going to look at 28. What are some possibilities? 7 and 4. What are some others? 128. What are some others? 2 and 14. I think that's it, right? Okay, that's it. All right, now this is the easy kind. So since that's the easy kind, listen to the directions. Okay, so a while ago we discussed the fact that if the last sign's positive, it kind of makes sense that my last terms better be the same sign, because a negative times a negative gives me a positive. A positive times a positive gives me a positive. If I want this product right here to be negative, then that means one has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. Okay? Trial and error. We're going to do trial and error here. So for example, now listen carefully. So let's suppose that I use 7 and 4. 7 and 4. What you want to try sometimes is to use the factors here. It doesn't always work, but it's always good to try it. Use factors here that are closer together on the number line. You have 7, 4, you have 128, and you have 214. Which of these pairs are closer together on the number line? 7, 4. It doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does. So let's try that first. I'm going to put the 7 here, the 4 here. Okay, doesn't matter. You can put the 4 here, 7 here. It does not matter. But I do know this. I do know that these signs have to be different. Why do these signs in here have to be different? Because the last sign is negative. So let's go ahead and make this negative, this positive. See what happens. Trial and error. You have to have different ways of looking at this. Now, what some students do is they put that there and then they think they're done. But you forgot to check yourself. Let's FOIL this out and see if I get this back. What's n times n? Okay, let's go to the last. What's the negative 7 times a positive 4? Negative 28. So far my F and L are okay. But what have I not checked at this point? The out and the inner. And this out and the inner better give me what term? 3n. So that better give me 3n. Well, what is my outer? 4n. What is my inner? Negative 7n. What do I get when I combine them? Negative 3n, which is not what I wanted. What did I want? Positive. They're opposites, right? So all that tells me to do is do what with those signs? Change them. So the answer then would be n plus 7 times n minus 4. And you can check it. You can see now that it will work out. Because what's the outer? Okay, the outer. Negative 4n. What's the inner? 7n. Do you now get that positive 3n? Yeah. Okay. So that's your answer. So trial and error. That's the approach you take. Number 3. you have r, that's an r squared, minus 7r plus 6. So r squared minus 7r plus 6. What's the GCF?
1.
All right, so I'm not going to factor out the 1. I'm going to go directly, since it's a trinomial, I want to factor it as a product of two binomials. So you do the two sets of parentheses, and you're thinking FOIL. So the f, remember, you're going to multiply the first term of each binomial, and that's going to give you the first term of your trinomial. So what times what is r squared? R. All right, so that takes care of the f. Now let's go to the L. So my last is 6. So I need to find factors of 6. So 6, 1, 3, 2, right? Okay. Let's try 3, 2. Let's try 3, 2. Yes.
You said on the last question that it was important to use numbers that were closer on the number
Uh-huh.
line. What's the importance of that?
Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. That's what I would go first. So if you had a bunch of these things, I would try the numbers closer together. Yes. All right. So let's put 3 here, 2 here, see what happens. All right, the last sign is, think of the last sign. What is the last sign of my trinomial? Positive. All right, so all of you should now know that since my last sign's positive, these signs inside the parentheses better be the same. And it will always be the middle sign. Because it's the only way you can get a negative middle term, right? Is for both of these to be what kind of factors? Negative. A negative plus a negative is a A negative plus a negative is a negative. I said plus. I didn't say multiply. So these should all be the same, negative. Am I done? What should I do? Check it. So the only thing I haven't checked was the outer and the inner. What's the outer? What's the outer? Negative 2r. What's the inner? Negative 3r. What do I get when I combine them? I'm getting all kinds of things. Negative 6r, negative 5r. All right, a negative 3 and a negative 2 is a negative 5, right? Is that what I wanted? Nope. Reversing those, putting the 2 here to 3 there, is not going to help because you get the same thing. So that implies that 3, 2 did not work. So what do I try? 6, 1. So let's do this one now. So we're going to do it again. Trial and error. The more practice you do, the quicker you become. The more efficient you become. So we're going to try 6, 1. Does it matter where I put the 6 and 1? No. If it doesn't work, it's not going to matter here because the coefficient of r squared is 1. But later on, it's not going to be 1 anymore, so it's not going to matter at that point, but we may need to reverse the order. So I'm going to put the 6 here, the 1 there. And I know that both of these signs better be negative. Now let's check. FOIL. First of all, what are my factors? What are my factors here? R minus 6 is the first one. What's my second factor?
R minus 1.
R minus 1. I'm multiplying how many factors? 2. All right. And those factors are both binomials. So let's FOIL to check that product. First, what's R times R? R squared. So R squared, I have my first. What's the outer? Negative R. What's the inner? Negative 6r. What's the last? Plus 6. When I combine them, do I get my trinomial here? Because what's the out and the inner combined? Negative 7r, which is what you want. And I have the r squared and I have the plus 6. There's number 3. Number 4. Let's suppose in number 4 you had this. You had n squared minus 6n minus 7. All right, what's the GCF? 1. 2 binomials. You're thinking of trial and error, reverse FOIL. What's the only possibility for my 2 first terms? N and n. That's the only possibility. So that takes care of L. Now let's look at the L. So although my last term here is a negative 7, let's just look at 7 for the moment. What are the factors of 7? 1 and 7. That's it, right? That's the only thing I can use. Where do you want to put the 1? Where do you want to put the 7? 7 first? Okay, then it doesn't matter. 1 second. All right, let's talk about the signs. Same or different? Different. Because that's the only way you can get a negative 7 is with one to be positive and the other one to be negative. But think about what you want. You want the middle term to be a negative 6n, right? So look at this now. Even before we put the signs in, what's the outer? Just look at the outer for right now. N. Because n times 1 is n, right? 7 times n is 7n. Now, notice that those signs are different, so I'm going to be subtracting them. So what's n from 7n? 6n, which is what you wanted. But I need 6n to be what kind of number? Negative. So look at this. Is it the 7 or the 1 that needs to be negative? The 7. And this has to be what? Positive, which means that this has to be negative, this has to be positive. And so you FOIL it out. And if you make the mistake, if you put this as positive, this is negative, and you FOIL it, you'll see your mistake. You just fix it. Fix it. So what's n times n? N squared. What's the outer? N. What's the inner? Negative 7n. When I add them up, what do I get? Negative 6n, which is what you wanted. And then the last, what's the negative 7 times a positive 1? Negative 7. So there's your answer. Number 5. Let's suppose number 5, you had b squared minus 3b minus 3. B squared minus 3b minus 3. All right, what's the GCF? What? GCF is 1. You have a trinomial. You can go directly to the 2 binomials. Okay. Reverse FOIL. Give me 2 factors or 2 terms whose product is b squared. That's the only possibility, b and b, right? My last term's a negative 3, but let's just look at the absolute value of that, which is just 3. So we can look at factors of 3. What are they? 1 and 3. That's the only factors of 3. Let's put the 3 here, 1 there. Okay? The last sign is negative. That means these signs in here are different. All right, what some people will do is they'll go directly and they'll put signs in. That's fine, no big deal. Plus, minus, right? But what should you do? Check. What's the outer? What is the outer? Negative b. What's the inner? What do I get when I add these up? 2b. Is that what I wanted? Nope. Okay, that didn't work out. I'll try something different. All right. What different could you try? Change the signs? Okay. All right. So you could say b minus 3, b plus 1, right? All right, let's check it. B times b is b squared. A negative 3 times a positive 1 is still a negative 3. But I got to check down the inner. What's the outer? B. What's the inner? What do I get when I combine them? That's not what I wanted. Huh. What's wrong? Switch the signs? I already switched the signs. Switch the numbers? Okay, fine. Think about it now. If I switch the numbers, -3, +1, isn't that the same thing as this? So what she's saying is this: switch the numbers. So b plus 1, b minus 3. Well, that's the same thing, isn't it? Okay, we don't use the word no solution because we only use the idea of solution when we're solving an equation. This is not an equation. But remember, you want to factor, right? Well, it turns out that this trinomial cannot be factored. Cannot be factored. So you may remember that word prime. So this is prime. So you are going to have some situations where the trinomial cannot be factored. So if it cannot be factored, what word do you use? Prime. Use the word prime. Cannot be factored. Okay? All right, number 6. Okay, 6, suppose we had this. Suppose I had x squared minus 8x plus 16. X squared minus 8x plus 16. GCF? 1. So what do you want to try now? You want to factor. How are you going to do this? You have enough experience now to tell me what to do. Right, it's 2 binomials. And you just got to fill in those terms. X and X, okay? Now we go directly to which part of this trinomial? 16, L, the last part. So I need 2 numbers whose product is 16. So we're looking at factors of 16. There's 16, 1. There is 8, 2. There's 4, 4, right? What do you want to try first? 4, 4, okay? So I'm going to put the 4 and 4. What else should you be asking yourself as you go through this process? What's the next thing? Huh? The signs that I'm going to need. What is it? Negative. Because the last sign is positive. The only way you can get a positive is both the 4s are both what? Positive or negative. You know that it has to be what? Negative because of the middle term. Let's check it. What's the outer? Negative 4x. What's the inner? What do you get when you add them up? Which is what you wanted. So the answer is going to be x minus 4 times x minus 4. Now, since those 2 binomials are the same, you can write it as x minus 4 squared. Okay. All right. Let's look at this one. All right. So let's suppose you had this. Number 7. Suppose you had 8 minus 6m plus m squared. 8. So there's one like that in my math lab and one like that in your worksheet that looks like this. If you look at all the other problems, and I'm going to use a new word now. If I go back and look at all of the other problems we've done, I'll come back and show what number 7 is. But if you look at number 2, I had n squared. There are how many terms you see here? 3. There's an n squared term, there's an n term, and then this number that doesn't have a variable attached to it, that's called the constant. Constant. What's listed first here, the square term or the first degree term? Square term. What's listed last?
Constant.
Constant. So whenever you go from largest exponent to the constant, that's called descending order. Descending order. You may remember that word. It sometimes helps if you put your trinomial in descending order. So number 2 is already in descending order. Number 3 was already in descending order. Number 4 was already in descending order. Number 5 was already in descending order. I went from largest exponent to the constant. But what do you notice about number 7? Is that in descending order? No. So if you want to, it is a good idea to put this in descending order. So that's the same thing as saying, let's put what first? M squared. Good. What's second? Minus 6m. And then plus 8. And now we factor. So we put it in descending order. Okay, so when I factor this, you should be able to tell me at this point, since we've done a few, you should be able to, within 15 seconds, tell me what you think the answer is.
N minus 2 times N minus 4.
Y'all agree?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Because m times m is m squared. A negative 2 times a negative 4 is a positive 8. And if I look at the outer, which is negative 4m, and I look at the inner, which is negative 2m, I do get what? Negative 6m. So that's correct. So that's your answer. Now, if someone else did this, could someone else had said m minus 4 times m minus 2? Yeah, because multiplication is commutative. Commutative. The order in which you multiply does not matter. All right. Now, let's look at this now. So this is going to be, so what we did here was in all these problems, all 7 problems, what was the GCF? 1. Okay, now let's start talking about, well, what if the GCF is not 1? Okay, so let's do that.